pumping heat on the parallel bars. Yeah!
Joan Rivers was once Johnny Carson's greatest asset. She revitalized his show when ratings dipped, kept audiences laughing as his go-to permanent guest host, and essentially became his right-hand comic. But in 1986, everything changed. One joke slipped out of her mouth, and Carson's warm expression turned icy. Within days, Rivers was permanently banned from The Tonight Show. Her name was erased from the show's history, never spoken on air for nearly 3 decades, longer than Carson himself remained alive. The most shocking part is that the joke wasn't even aimed at Carson, but it cost Rivers nearly everything. What followed was Hollywood's longest and most infamous feud, sparked by just 10 seconds of comedy. Born Joan Alexandra Malinsky on June 8, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York, Rivers grew up in a household defined by resilience and wit. Her parents, Beatrice and Meyer Malinsky, were Russian Jewish immigrants striving for a better life in America. Meyer worked as a respected doctor, but what truly set him apart was his quick, razor-sharp humor. That same humor filled their home, and Joan absorbed it like oxygen. In the tough environment of 1930s Brooklyn, laughter wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. For Joan, comedy became more than just a pastime, it was a shield, a weapon, and eventually, her greatest gift. Yet childhood wasn't easy. Joan struggled with her weight in a society that glorified thinness, and those insecurities haunted her. But instead of hiding her pain, she brought it to the stage. She made audiences laugh at her dieting disasters and her feelings of being an outsider. People laughed, but more importantly, they connected with her honesty. She dared to say out loud what many secretly felt, and that boldness set her apart. In the 1960s, when women were almost non-existent in stand-up comedy, Rivers broke through by embracing vulnerability. She opened the door for countless women who followed her. Rivers' academic path was impressive. She graduated from Barnard College in 1954 with a degree in English literature and anthropology. But behind her achievements, she carried a hidden insecurity. To elevate her image, she sometimes exaggerated her accomplishments, claiming she graduated summa cum laude and was a member of Phi Beta Kappa, claims that weren't true. Those fabrications revealed a deeper pressure, the need to be respected in a world that rarely valued women, especially in comedy and entertainment. Changing her name from Malinsky to Rivers was another act of survival. At the suggestion of her agent, Tony Rivers, Joan adopted the name and embraced its simplicity. Rivers was easier to book, easier to remember, and less likely to face prejudice. With her new identity, Joan began performing in New York nightclubs, determined to make people notice her. But her rise to stardom was anything but instant. From the mid-1950s through the early 1960s, Joan paid her dues in smoky Greenwich Village clubs, struggling night after night. She endured rejection, heckling, and being booed off stage. Club owners doubted that a woman could ever succeed in stand-up. Money was scarce, but she refused to quit. Those grueling years sharpened her comedy and hardened her resolve. When she finally broke through, it wasn't just for herself, she proved women could dominate the toughest stages in comedy. Her big break came with help from an unlikely source. After 7 failed auditions for The Tonight Show, Rivers finally got her shot in 1965 thanks to Bill Cosby, who vouched for her talent. "She can't be worse than the guy you had last night," he quipped. On February 17, 1965, Rivers appeared in the dreaded final 10 minutes of the show, a slot no one wanted. But she turned it into comedy gold. Carson was so impressed, he told her on air, "You're going to be a star." Overnight, everything changed. Joan received a flood of offers and went on to appear on the show 9 more times that same year. Her relationship with The Tonight Show only deepened. By 1983, she shattered barriers by becoming the show's permanent guest host, the first woman in history to do so. Late-night TV had always been ruled by men, but Rivers commanded the stage with authority, charm, and wit. She inspired women everywhere to aim higher. Still, Joan always suspected NBC gave her the role because they assumed she wasn't a threat to Carson. That underestimation worked in her favor. Over the next 2 decades, she would appear nearly 100 times on the show, her fearless comedy skewering celebrities, politics, and herself. Rivers' voice became embedded in American culture. Her personal life, however, was more complicated. Rivers' first marriage in 1957 to James Sanger, heir to the Bond clothing store fortune, seemed perfect on paper. But just months into the marriage, a painful truth emerged: Sanger never wanted children. For Joan, who had always dreamed of motherhood, the revelation was devastating. The marriage lasted barely 6 months and was annulled by 1958. She later joked that it had lasted 6 months longer than it should have. Instead of breaking her, the failed marriage pushed her to reinvent herself, leading her deeper into acting and comedy. In 1965, Joan married Edgar Rosenberg, who would become both her husband and her creative partner. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect team, but Joan was always candid about her flaws. In later interviews, she admitted to multiple affairs during her marriage. She recalled a one-night encounter with Robert Mitchum in the 1960s after a Tonight Show appearance, and in 1971, she said she had a passionate affair with actor Gabriel Dell during her Broadway run of Fun City. That affair became so intense she briefly left Edgar. She even joked, though no one knew how seriously to take it, about flings with Johnny Carson and John F. Kennedy. Joan's confessions shocked people, but she didn't hide. Instead, she wove her private escapades into her comedy, once again turning scandal into laughter. Joan's reinvention didn't start in adulthood, it began at age 8. As a child, she created an alter ego named J. Sandra Meredith. This wasn't just a playful fantasy, it was an escape. Growing up in the shadow of her older sister and enduring her mother's harsh comments about her looks, Joan felt inadequate. J. Sandra Meredith was everything Joan longed to be: beautiful, confident, and admired. This early act of reinvention foreshadowed a lifelong pattern. Joan reshaped herself through comedy, ambition, and eventually plastic surgery. Her need for validation, to be loved and accepted, became the fuel that drove her to the top. That same need also pushed her into embellishments. She repeated claims about graduating summa cum laude and joining Phi Beta Kappa, both false. She even told a story about sharing a kiss with Barbra Streisand during the play Driftwood, though biographers pointed out that the two actresses were never on stage together. These exaggerations weren't accidental, they were calculated efforts to craft a bigger, bolder version of herself in a world obsessed with image. Body image was a lifelong struggle. Her mother's cruel comparisons haunted her, and fame only magnified the pressure. Joan turned to plastic surgery as both a solution and a coping mechanism. She openly admitted to procedures on her nose, breasts, lips, stomach, eyes, and arms. Botox became routine. After Edgar's suicide in 1987, Joan spiraled into bulimia, which she later revealed in her writings. She tried to laugh about it, but beneath the humor was real suffering. Her battles with body image never truly ended.